I know when I started with Dendro, it was a little bit tricky to get my head around how exactly it worked and what it should look like when I'm using it. So I thought it'd be useful to share with you a bit of an insight into what a study session or really an exploration session within Dendro can look like. So this is the Dendro front page. The main thing we do with Dendro is engage. I can add sources here, and you can see a selection of information that I've loaded up recently. So the most recent article I uploaded was an article from Tom Sherrington on 10 low impact activities to do less of or stop altogether. Then I've got an article that James Mannion mentioned the other day. I've got an article I was exploring this morning. Here's a Twitter thing that I wanted to explore that I just copy pasted in there, etc. And we'll see some of that as we go. So when I log on for the day, I'll just hit engage. And then things will come up that I have snipped. So let's just see the origin of this. This is an interesting quote from Seneca. There is nothing the busy man is less busied with than living. There is nothing harder to learn. And where did that come from? So that came from Stoicism 101, a practical guide for entrepreneurs. So when I look at that, I'm going to think to myself, what do I want to do with this information? Maybe I want to capture it in Anki. And in fact, this is a quote that I want to capture in Anki. There's not that much more processing I can do with this particular snippet. Then I'm going to paste the quote in there. Now, I'm not going to try to memorize this whole quote in one go, but what I'm going to do is create some close deletion from it. So there is nothing the busy man is less busied with. Usually we want to try to take out only one word at a time. So let's say living. So what's going to happen when this comes up is it's going to say there's nothing the busy man is ... busied with than ... There is nothing harder to ... So I'm going to have to remember the words less, living, and learn. I'm going to grab the context from that by grabbing the URL, and that'll enable me to go back to this note at a later date. So that's added. That's now added to Anki, and off we go. What I'll do now is deactivate that and continue. So this is from a Peter Gray article on the immersion approach to critical thinking in psychology instruction. This is a great article, and let's just see where this came from. So this snippet here is just a first level snippet, but you can see how much I've processed from here. So let's go back to this snippet. I now teach my students some techniques, including those described later, designed to help them keep the main ideas in mind and to think about the more specific information in the context of those ideas. This is great. Okay, so this is actually a note that I made at the time. I said, this is great. This is basically the idea of taking the generalization and furnishing it with examples that stretch understanding, examples that represent variation. Love it. So let's have another read. And you'll notice that I'm really not racing here. This is about building long-term memories and really deeply understanding information. So I now teach my students some techniques, including those described later, designed to help them to keep the main idea in mind and to think about more specific information in the context of those ideas. Okay, now I actually saw another note based upon this section. Here he says, including those described later. So there was actually another note very similar to this that I saw earlier today, and I know that I'm already summarizing that somewhere. It'll come up later for me within Dendro, so I'm actually happy to let this go. I'm happy to let this one go. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit next, and what that means, so when I say let this one go, what I would have done is make this inactive, which would mean that it doesn't show up in my feed again, and for me to say I'm happy to encounter this idea in other ways. But I'm actually just going to say next, which means it'll come up in a few days or maybe a week or so, depending on the algorithm and how much other content I have in here. And I'm going to see how I feel when I come back to it next time. And when I come back to it next time, I might feel like I need to do something else with it, or I might just be happy to deactivate it. All right, what do we got here? Keyword research. So I was doing some SEO information, and this is a bit I snipped out. What are people searching for? How many people are searching for it? In what format do they want that information? So this was like a 3-point guide to SEO. I'm pretty happy to let that go. I don't think that's super insight. Well, it's nice and basic framework, but I don't think I'm going to have to refer to this information again. The only bit that's new to me is like, I now get this idea and I know some tools I can use to research SEO. Similar for this. This is important, but I'm more interested in letting the content drive the format. So for me, trying to conform to some specific format's not that interesting. So I'm just deactivating that note, which means I won't see it again. As recent studies have shown, a single high-ranking page can show up in dozens, if not hundreds, of search engine result pages. A good practice to identify relevant queries and use those as your H2 headings. Interesting. I'll remember that, so I can just deactivate that. Google is clear that you should have a comprehensive page on a topic. Good to know. I'm just deactivating these because I kind of get them. Okay. Now when we had that Peter Gray thing come up about kind of talking about the main idea and branching off that, furnishing the generalization or the general idea with specific examples. This is the section I was talking about that, recently, this is the quote unquote later bit. So here's Peter's original quote. My single idea lectures typically follow a certain pattern. I begin, good morning. The idea I want to talk about is today is ... Then I say the idea, what written on the chalkboard, etc., etc. This is actually really cool. Ask students if they can think about additional examples, say something about the idea's history, ask students if they can think about ways to test the idea, and finally describe one or more actual research studies that support, refute, or delimit the idea. The process. I may introduce some technical terms, talk about a famous person or two, and discuss some methodological aspects of the research. But the focus throughout is on the idea. The main goal is to have students understand, appreciate, and think about the idea. So I thought this was a really nice summary of basically a lesson plan. So what I've done, I usually just write ... and I'm just pulling this idea apart, or Peter Gray's single idea lesson plan, because I think, at some point I might be working with an English teacher or a geography teacher or a philosophy teacher or something like that, a psychology teacher, and I want to support them, and I want to have in mind and easy to access Peter Gray's single idea lesson plan right there. So I'm trying to pull apart this idea, and what I've written for myself, these are notes that I've written in the past, is here's what he does, state the idea, and for me I've added in the EDI idea of have a bulletproof definition. You then elaborate on it, give examples, show relevance, ask students for additional examples, provide history, etc. And I've had an idea, maybe we can create a question map for this, but another idea I had was to create an acronym that kind of captures this. I'm not going to try to do that live here, but for me, I'm going to click next now, and that means this is going to come up again in future. I've now seen it a couple of times, and next time I'm going to play with it and try to create an acronym that kind of pulls together these ideas so that I can condense the memory down to a quick phrase and have that accessible and actionable for me when I'm coaching a teacher. So what's this? This is more Peter Gray. After preparing a list of ideas, the next step is planning an idea-centered course to choose readings that convey and discuss those ideas. Okay, not that interesting. So a lot of stuff you'll find, the first time you read it, you think, oh, that's really interesting. And the second time you read it, you think, oh, that's not that interesting anymore. And this is a really key value of using incremental reading software like Dendro, instead of just creating an Anki card straight away. So if I created an Anki card of this straight away, I would have been clogging up my Anki feed with information that's no longer that important to me, and it was just a decision made on a whim. So incremental reading is a powerful way to kind of keep that Anki feed nice and clean. So this is a investment insight from JP Morgan. 6 of the 10 best days, the ones you really don't want to miss, fell within 2 weeks of the 10 worst days. So that's actually a cool insight. 6 of the 10 best days fell within 2 weeks of the 10 worst days. So I'm going to And I'll just note here that I can make it plain text. So I'll just do this. 6 of the best 10 days fell within 2 weeks of the 10 worst days. Now, this is important to me because pulling money out of a market when it's down is a good way to lose a lot of money. So this is an insight that I want to have. 6 of the 10 best days fell within 2 weeks of the 10 worst days. So that goes 6, 10, 14, 10. It's not the best thing to make an Anki card out of because it's not that meaningful, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to see if it sticks. If it doesn't stick, that's okay. JP Morgan. 6 of the 10 best days fell within 2 weeks of the 10. I'm going to bold these two 10s so I remember they're similar. I'm going to bold the best as well, actually. So, you know, maybe this means that in the next market crash, if I or a friend is thinking about pulling money out, I'll be able to recall, well, actually, 6 of the best 10 days fell within 2 weeks of the 10 worst days. And if I can remember that, I can then go into Anki, go in the search function and find this again, go back to the original article and delve deeper if I want to. Okay, this is a dude's name I wanted to remember, but I might explore this later. This is about asking customer questions. This is something this is actually a note. So I can see this is a note of something I want to look at later on. So I'm just going to hit next, and I might come back to this at some point. No, look, I'm not. If I want to come back to this at some point, I'll just Google the mum test. I don't need to keep this as a note in my feed. Okay, so this is the book, The Art of Thinking Clearly, that I've downloaded that I'm incrementally reading. So I'm up to chapter 2 by the looks of things. And I'm just going to start reading now and see if there's something in here that I want to clip out. So let's see how much I've read so far. Very little by the looks of things. I actually haven't made any notes. And I think I just finished the introduction. And now what was the first chapter on? Oh yeah, that's right. It was about survivorship bias, but I also already knew about survivorship bias and the idea of Abraham Wald and the fighter jets in, I think it was World War II, and holes holes in non-critical areas of the plane. So I didn't need to make a note of that. I already knew about that. So now we're looking at swimmer's body illusion. So now I'm just going to read some of this and see if there's anything that I want to take out of it. Does Harvard make you smarter? An assistant trader, Nicola Nassim Taleb, resolved to do something about the stubborn. I'll let you read it. Okay, so I think this is actually a really interesting idea. So what I've done is I've highlighted a section. So you want to err on the side of highlighting more rather than less, because when this comes back to me, all I'm going to see is the section I've highlighted and snipped out. So I like this. This is probably enough for me to get the picture. We've got an example of swimmers' bodies, and we've got the generalization, which is the swimmer's body illusion. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to look, there's no page number here, so I'm just going to call it PDF page 15. I've highlighted that. I'm going to click add note. And I'm going to go PDF page 15 and save. And now what's that's done is created a note that's going to come back to me later. I'll return to the main thing and come here. Now this is a really nice section that complements what we just read. So I'm actually going to copy that, and I'm going to put that in the same note as before because it relates to the same idea. They kind of go together. Okay, copy pasting is a bit messy. You see, Dendro can be a little bit clunky at times, but it's better than anything else I've found. So I'm gonna have to click add note, then copy from there. And then I'll go back. That's saved now. Go back here. And I've read enough of this, and so I'll just click to the next page, and I'll leave this reading for next time. So, and leave that active. So this book will pop up again for me. So as you can see, this process of incremental reading, when we'd usually read a book and we might read an idea and have a spark of inspiration and think, gee, that's an interesting idea. The problem is, without a structured way to distill that idea into something that you can take away and remember forever, apart from entertainment and the enjoyment of that spark of inspiration, what's the point of reading it? And so George and I together have actually developed what we call the orange juice analogy. So the question is, when you juice oranges, what's the point of juicing them? Is it to extract juice, or is it to have a pile of juiced oranges on the table to say, oh, look how many oranges we've juiced? And the same, the power of this analogy is it's the same with books. Often the way that we measure our success of book reading is, oh, I read 50 books a year. That's totally uninteresting. What is interesting is the number of ideas that we can extract from those books, and the extent to which we can recall those ideas for the long term. So whilst it looks like I'm only reading a little bit within Dendro, I'm actually processing the information much deeper and in a way that's going to enable me to remember it for the long term, which means that any reading that I do is not wasted reading, and I'm actually getting a lot more bang for my buck in terms of the time that I'm putting in and what I'm getting out of it. So that's a bit of an insight into what incremental reading looks like through the software Dendro.